The hot summer sun beat down on the interstate as Riley Chen checked her GPS one more time. 3 more hours to go before reaching Fort Carson. She had been driving for 6 hours already, and her 3 German shepherds in the back were getting restless. The air conditioning in her black SUV was working overtime, but she could still hear Rex panting heavily from his travel crate. Riley wasn't your typical 28-year-old woman. For the past 8 years, she had dedicated her life to training military, working dogs. Her hands bore small scars from countless training sessions, and her eyes held the focused intensity of someone who had seen real combat situations. But today, dressed in faded jeans and a plain gray t-shirt, she looked like any other traveler on the highway. "Almost there, boys," she called back to her dogs, using the rearview mirror to check on them. Rex, the oldest at 5 years, was her lead dog. His dark brown eyes met hers in the mirror, and his tail gave a small wag. Next to him, Thor, the powerhouse of the group, was lying down but alert. Luna, the only female and the smartest of the 3, was already standing in her crate, somehow sensing they would be stopping soon. The sunset rest area appeared like an oasis after hours of endless highway. Riley had stopped here many times before during her cross-country assignments. It was usually quiet, with maybe a few families and long-haul truckers taking a break. But as she pulled into the parking lot, her trained eye immediately noticed something different. 15 gleaming motorcycles were lined up in perfect formation near the picnic tables. The chrome caught the sunlight like mirrors, and the rumble of engines filled the air even though most of the bikes were turned off. Riley had nothing against motorcycle enthusiasts, but the scene in front of her made her pause. The bikers had completely taken over the central area of the rest stop. Coolers were set up on the picnic tables. Music was playing from a portable speaker, and the smell of cigarettes mixed with the aroma of fast food. They were loud, animated, and clearly enjoying their break from the road. Most appeared to be in their 30s and 40s, wearing leather vests with patches that suggested they belonged to some kind of club. Riley's military training kicked in automatically. She assessed the situation with the same careful attention she used when entering potentially dangerous areas overseas. The group seemed to be having fun, but their body language suggested they saw this rest stop as their territory. Several of them had already noticed her SUV pulling in, and she could see them pointing and talking among themselves. "Just get water for the dogs and get back on the road," she told herself, parking as far from the group as possible while still being close to the water fountains. As she stepped out of her vehicle, the conversations among the bikers grew quieter, but she could feel their eyes on her. Riley had experienced this kind of attention before. Being a young woman in male-dominated environments had taught her to stay alert while appearing confident and unbothered. The 3 dogs in her SUV immediately became more active when they sensed her tension. Rex stood up in his crate and gave a low whine. These weren't ordinary pets who spent their days playing fetch in suburban backyards. These were working dogs who had been trained to read human emotions and respond to threats. They could sense that their handler was in a situation that required extra awareness. Riley grabbed 3 collapsible water bowls from her kit and walked toward the water fountain, her steps purposeful but not hurried. She had learned long ago that showing fear or uncertainty would only invite trouble. Behind her, she could hear the bikers' conversations resuming, but with a different tone now. "Check out the new arrival," she heard one of them say, not bothering to lower his voice. "Looks like we got ourselves some company," another added with a chuckle. Riley filled the first bowl with cool water, her movement steady despite the growing attention from the group. She had been in far more dangerous situations than this. During her deployments, she had worked in areas where the wrong move could mean life or death. A group of bikers at a rest stop was challenging but manageable. The problem started when she walked back to her SUV to get the dogs their water. 2 of the bikers had moved closer to her vehicle, clearly curious about what she was transporting. Through the tinted windows, they could see the outlines of the travel crates, but not much detail. "Hey there, miss," called out the larger of the 2 men. He was built like a linebacker, with arms covered in colorful tattoos and a beard that reached his chest. His leather vest had patches that read, "Road Devils MC" and "President." This was clearly someone used to being in charge. Riley nodded politely but didn't slow down. She had no interest in conversation, but she also knew that completely ignoring them might escalate the situation. "Not very friendly, are you?" the second biker said. He was thinner but had an aggressive edge to his voice that made Riley's internal warning system activate. His vest marked him as VP, which she assumed meant vice president of their club. "Just passing through," Riley replied calmly, reaching her SUV and opening the rear door to access her dogs. The moment she opened the door, the sound of 3 large dogs moving around in their crates filled the air. Rex gave a bark of greeting, expecting to be let out for water and a quick walk. The sound was deep and authoritative, the bark of a dog that was serious about his job. "Well, well, what do we have here?" The club president moved closer, trying to peer into the vehicle. "Looks like you're traveling with some 4-legged friends." Riley's jaw tightened slightly. She didn't like people getting too close to her dogs without permission, especially people she didn't know or trust. Rex, Thor, and Luna were trained military assets, not pets to be admired by strangers. "Working dogs," she said simply, hoping that would end the conversation. Instead, it seemed to amuse the bikers even more. The club president let out a loud laugh that drew attention from the rest of his group. "Working dogs," he called out to his friends. "Hey guys, we got ourselves a lady with working dogs over here." The response from the other bikers was immediate and exactly what Riley had hoped to avoid. More of them started moving in their direction, curious about the entertainment their president had discovered. Riley's years of experience told her this situation was about to get more complicated. She could handle herself in most circumstances, but she was outnumbered 15-1, far from any backup and responsible for 3 valuable military dogs. Her priority had to be getting out of this situation without anyone getting hurt. But as more bikers approached, their comments becoming louder and more intrusive, Riley realized that leaving quietly might not be an option. Rex was becoming more agitated in his crate, sensing his handler's stress. Thor had started a low growling that meant he was ready for action, and Luna, always the smartest of the group, was completely silent and focused, which was often the most dangerous sign of all. The club president stepped even closer to Riley, clearly enjoying the fact that he had an audience of his fellow bikers, watching the interaction. "So what kind of work do these dogs do, sweetheart?" he asked, his tone suggesting he found the whole idea amusing. "They herd sheep or something?" Riley took a deep breath, her mind racing through her options. She could try to diffuse the situation with humor, attempt to educate them about military working dogs, or simply get back in her SUV and drive away. But something in the president's tone and the way his club members were positioning themselves around her vehicle told her that none of those options were going to work. The afternoon sun seemed to get hotter, and the sound of traffic on the nearby interstate faded into the background. What had started as a simple rest stop was turning into something much more serious, and Riley knew that whatever happened next would depend on decisions made in the next few minutes. The situation at the rest stop was quickly spiraling out of Riley's control. What had started as curious questions from the biker club president was now turning into a full-blown spectacle. More members of the Road Devils MC were gathering around her SUV, drawn by their leader's loud commentary and obvious amusement. "Come on now, don't be shy," the president said, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "Tell us all about these working dogs of yours. What do they do, fetch your slippers?" The laughter that followed his joke was loud and harsh. Riley could feel her cheeks burning, not from embarrassment, but from the controlled anger that came from being mocked for something she took very seriously. These men had no idea what her dogs had been through, what they had accomplished, or how many lives they had saved. The vice president, the thinner man with the aggressive edge, stepped closer to the rear window of Riley's SUV. He cupped his hands against the glass, trying to get a better look at the dogs inside their travel crates. "They look pretty big," he said, turning back to the group. "Maybe they're guard dogs for some rich lady's mansion. Or maybe they're show dogs," another biker called out from the picnic table area. "You know, the kind that get their hair done and wear little ribbons." The suggestion sent the entire group into another round of laughter. Riley watched as more of them abandoned their food and drinks to come see what was so entertaining. She was now surrounded by nearly the entire motorcycle club, with her SUV serving as the center of their impromptu entertainment. Rex's barking from inside the vehicle was getting more frequent and more urgent. He could sense the hostile energy surrounding his handler, and his protective instincts were kicking in. Thor had joined in with his own deep, rumbling barks, while Luna remained ominously quiet, which anyone familiar with military dogs would recognize as a warning sign. "Listen to them bark," the president said mockingly. "Real tough guys, aren't they? Locked up in their little boxes making all that noise." Riley's hands clenched into fists at her sides. She had spent years training these dogs, had seen them work in life and death situations, had watched them save soldiers' lives in combat zones. To hear them being mocked by people who knew nothing about their service was almost more than she could bear. "They're not pets," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the laughter. "They're working animals with specialized training." "Oh, specialized training," the vice president repeated in a high-pitched, mocking tone. "Did you hear that, boys? These are special dogs with special training." "What kind of special training?" asked a biker with a thick gray beard and arms like tree trunks. "Can they roll over? Play dead? Maybe they know how to shake hands." He demonstrated by holding out his hand and shaking it in the air, causing another wave of laughter from his buddies. Riley realized that trying to explain the reality of military dog training to this group was pointless. They had already decided she was just another civilian with fancy pets. The mockery continued for several more minutes, with each biker trying to come up with funnier comments than the last. They joked about dog shows, about poodles with painted nails, about rich women who treated their animals better than most people treated their children. Each comment cut deeper than the last, not because Riley cared what these strangers thought about her, but because they were disrespecting something sacred to her. But the tone began to shift when the club president stepped closer to Riley herself. Rather than just commenting on her dogs, his expression changed from amused mockery to something more predatory. "You know what I think?" he said, his voice dropping to a lower, more intimate tone. "I think you're just a lonely lady driving around the country with some expensive dogs looking for attention." Riley's military training kicked in immediately. She recognized the change in his body language, the way he was positioning himself to cut off her escape routes, the way his voice had shifted from public entertainment to private intimidation. "I think I should get going," she said calmly, reaching for the handle of her SUV's driver door. Don't be like that," the vice president said, moving to block her path. "We're just having some fun here. No need to get all serious on us." "Yeah," added another biker, a younger man with multiple face piercings and tattoos covering his neck. "We don't get many visitors out here, especially not pretty ones with fancy dogs." The word pretty was said in a way that made Riley's skin crawl. She had dealt with inappropriate comments before, both in civilian life and during her military service. But being outnumbered 15-1 in an isolated rest stop added a dangerous element to the situation. "Come on, sweetheart," the president said, taking another step closer. "Why don't you let these dogs out so we can see what all the fuss is about? I bet they're not as tough as you're trying to make them sound." "They stay in their crates," Riley replied firmly. "They're not trained for public interaction." This statement caused even more laughter from the group. The idea that dogs needed special training just to be around people struck them as the height of pretentiousness. "Not trained for public interaction," the gray-bearded biker repeated. "What are they, bomb dogs or something?" He meant it as a joke, but his guess was closer to the truth than he realized. Luna was indeed trained in explosive detection, among other skills. Rex and Thor had their own specialized training that had been honed through years of military service and real combat situations. "Maybe they're drug dogs," suggested another member of the group. "That would explain why she doesn't want to let them out around us." This comment caused a noticeable shift in the group's energy. Several of the bikers exchanged glances, and Riley noticed a few of them unconsciously touching their jacket pockets or looking toward their motorcycles. She filed this observation away for future reference. "Drug dogs, huh?" the president said, his tone becoming more aggressive. "That would be interesting. Real interesting." The underlying threat in his voice was unmistakable. Riley realized that what had started as mockery and harassment was now moving into potentially dangerous territory. These men were no longer just amusing themselves at her expense. They were beginning to see her as a potential threat to whatever activities they might be involved in. The dogs in the SUV seemed to sense the change as well. Rex's barking became more urgent, and Thor had started throwing his considerable weight against the sides of his crate, creating loud banging sounds that echoed across the parking lot. Luna remained silent, but Riley could see her intense yellow, eyes focused on the group of men through the tinted glass. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Riley said, trying to de-escalate the situation. "I just stopped for water and I'll be on my way." "See, that's where you're wrong," the president said, moving close enough that she could smell the beer on his breath. "You drove into our rest stop, with your fancy truck and your mysterious dogs, acting all high and mighty. Maybe we think you should stick around for a while, get to know the neighborhood." The circle of bikers had tightened around Riley and her vehicle. What had started as casual curiosity had evolved into deliberate intimidation. Riley's years of military experience told her she was running out of peaceful options for resolving this situation. Her hand moved instinctively toward the rear door handle of her SUV, not to escape, but to access her partners. Rex, Thor, and Luna weren't just her working dogs. They were her team, her backup, and her best chance of getting out of this situation safely. The president noticed her movement and smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Going somewhere?" he asked. Riley's heart was pounding, but her breathing remained steady. 8 years of military training had taught her to stay calm when things got dangerous. And right now, every instinct she had was telling her this situation was about to get much worse. The circle of bikers had grown tighter around her and her SUV. What had started as 15 curious motorcycle riders was now a wall of leather, tattoos, and hostile energy. The club president was standing so close, she could see the sweat, stains on his shirt and count the gray hairs in his beard. "I asked you a question," he said, his voice low and threatening. "Where do you think you're going?" Riley's hand was still on the rear door handle of her vehicle. Through the tinted glass, she could see Rex pacing in his crate, his dark eyes locked on the group of men. Thor was standing rigid, every muscle in his body tense and ready. Luna, the smartest and most disciplined of the three, was sitting perfectly still, but her ears were forward and her eyes were calculating. "I'm going to let my dogs out for water," Riley said calmly. "Then I'm getting back on the road." The statement caused a ripple of laughter through the group, but it was different from the mocking laughter they had shared earlier. This laughter had an edge to it, the kind that came before people did something they might regret later. "Oh, you're going to let the little puppies out," the vice president said, moving to stand on Riley's other side. "That should be fun to watch." "Maybe they'll do some tricks for us," added the gray-bearded biker. "I always wanted to see a dog show." Riley ignored their comments and opened the rear door. The moment the latch clicked, the energy in the parking lot changed completely. The sound of the bikers' motorcycles, the distant traffic on the interstate, even the wind seemed to quiet down as if the world was holding its breath. Rex's deep bark echoed from inside his crate, but it wasn't the frantic barking of an excited pet. It was controlled, purposeful, and carried a warning that anyone with experience around working dogs would have recognized immediately. Thor answered with his own bark, equally controlled and twice as intimidating. Luna remained silent, which somehow made her presence even more ominous. "Easy, boys," Riley said softly, but her voice carried a tone of authority that none of the bikers had heard before. It wasn't the voice of someone asking her pets to behave. It was the voice of a commanding officer addressing her troops. She reached into the vehicle and began unlocking the first crate. The bikers pressed closer, curious to see what all the fuss was about. Most of them expected to see typical family dogs, maybe German shepherds or labs that looked tough but were really just oversized pets. "Rex, position Alpha," Riley said quietly, as she opened the first crate door. What emerged was not what any of the bikers had expected. Rex stepped out of his crate with the fluid grace of a predator. At 85 pounds of pure muscle and focused intelligence, he moved like no dog. they had ever seen. His coat was perfect, his posture was military straight, and his eyes swept the group of men with the calculating gaze of someone assessing threats. The laughter from the bikers died away almost instantly. Rex wasn't wagging his tail or looking around with the curiosity of a normal dog. Instead, he moved to a position exactly 18 inches to Riley's left and sat down, his body angled so he could watch the entire group while keeping his handler in his peripheral vision. "Thor, position beta," Riley continued, opening the second crate. Thor was even more impressive than Rex. At 90 pounds, he was the largest of the three dogs, with a broad chest and powerful hindquarters that spoke of years of physical conditioning. He emerged from his crate and immediately took a position 18 inches to Riley's right, creating a perfect formation that any military observer would have recognized as a protective stance. The bikers had stopped talking entirely now. Even the most aggressive among them could see that these weren't ordinary dogs. The way they moved, the way they positioned themselves, the way they focused on potential threats while maintaining perfect discipline was unlike anything they had encountered before. "And Luna," Riley said, opening the third crate. "Formation complete." Luna stepped out with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was. Smaller than the males at 70 pounds, she moved with a precision that was almost mechanical. She took her position directly behind Riley, completing a triangle formation that put all three dogs in optimal positions to respond to threats from any direction. The silence in the parking lot was deafening. The bikers who had been making jokes just minutes earlier were now staring at three animals that looked like they had stepped out of a military training manual. Rex, Thor, and Luna sat perfectly still, but their eyes never stopped moving, cataloging every person, every movement, every potential threat. "Okay," the club president said, his voice lacking its earlier confidence. "Those are some well-trained dogs, but they're still just dogs." Riley smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. It was the smile of someone who knew something the other person didn't, and who was about to demonstrate the difference between confidence and arrogance. "Just dogs," she repeated thoughtfully. "You know, that's exactly what a Taliban commander said about Rex in Afghanistan, right before Rex found the improvised explosive device that would have killed 12 American soldiers." The bikers exchanged glances. The mention of Afghanistan and explosives had introduced a new element to their understanding of the situation. These weren't just trained dogs. They were military working dogs with combat experience. "Thor spent 18 months in Iraq," Riley continued conversationally. "He's trained in crowd control and apprehension, very good at handling groups of hostile individuals who don't want to cooperate." Thor's ears twitched at the sound of his name, but he didn't move from his position. His dark eyes continued to scan the group of bikers, and several of them took unconscious steps backward. "And Luna," Riley said, her voice taking on a note of pride. "Luna is our detection specialist. She can find explosives, narcotics, weapons, pretty much anything you might want to hide. She's got a nose that's about 10,000 times more sensitive than yours, and she's been trained by the best handlers in the military." As if responding to her introduction, Luna stood up and began walking slowly toward the line of motorcycles parked near the picnic tables. Her movement was casual, almost lazy, but her nose was working constantly, processing scents that humans couldn't even detect. "What's she doing?" asked one of the younger bikers, his voice tight with nervousness. "Just having a look around," Riley replied. "Luna's curious about your bikes. She's probably wondering why some of them smell so interesting." The effect of this statement on the group was immediate and dramatic. Several of the bikers moved instinctively toward their motorcycles while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The confident, aggressive energy that had dominated the group just minutes earlier was rapidly being replaced by uncertainty and fear. Luna continued her casual inspection, moving from bike to bike with the methodical patience of a professional. When she reached the third motorcycle in the line, she stopped and sat down, looking back at Riley with the expression of a student who had found the correct answer to a difficult question. "Interesting," Riley said calmly. "Luna seems to think that bike has something worth investigating." The owner of the motorcycle, a thin man with nervous eyes and shaking hands, stepped forward quickly. "She's wrong," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "There's nothing on my bike." Riley didn't respond directly. Instead, she gave Luna a small hand signal that caused the dog to move to the next motorcycle. The crowd of bikers followed her progress, with the fascination of people watching a disaster unfold in slow motion. When Luna reached the 7th bike and sat down again, then moved to the 10th and repeated the action, the tension in the parking lot became almost unbearable. 3 different bikers now looked like they were about to be sick, while the rest of the group was beginning to understand that their afternoon of fun at the expense of a lone woman and her dogs had taken a very serious turn. "You know," Riley said thoughtfully, "Luna has a 98% accuracy rate in detection work. In 8 years of service, she's only had 3 false positives. The other 2,000 times she's alerted on something, she's been absolutely correct." The club president looked at his 3 members whose bikes had been marked by Luna, then back at Riley and her perfectly disciplined dogs. For the first time since the encounter began, he seemed to be considering the possibility that he had made a serious mistake in judgment. The parking lot had become a battlefield of wills, and everyone present could feel the shift in power. Riley stood calmly next to her SUV while Rex, Thor, and Luna maintained their perfect formation around her. The 15 bikers who had been so confident and aggressive just minutes earlier were now dealing with the uncomfortable reality that they had severely misjudged the situation. The club president's face had turned red, partly from the heat, but mostly from embarrassment. He was a man used to being in control, used to intimidating people through size and numbers, but standing there watching a 70-pound dog systematically identify problems in his crew's motorcycles was not something his experience had prepared him for. "Look, lady," he said, trying to regain some authority in his voice. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing here, but you need to call off your dogs and move along." Riley tilted her head slightly as if considering his request. "Game?" she repeated. "You think this is a game?" Luna had finished her inspection of the motorcycles and was walking back toward Riley with the satisfied expression of someone who had completed an assignment successfully. She took her position in the formation and sat down, her yellow eyes fixed on the group of increasingly nervous men. "Let me explain something to you," Riley said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded respect in life and death situations. "Rex has been deployed 3 times to Afghanistan. He's found over 40 improvised explosive devices, saved hundreds of lives, and has never failed to protect his unit. Thor served 18 months in Iraq, where he helped maintain order in some of the most dangerous cities in the world. Luna has a detection record that most law enforcement agencies would kill for." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "These aren't pets. They're not show dogs. They're United States military working dogs with more combat experience than most human soldiers." The youngest member of the biker group, the one with the face piercings, shifted nervously on his feet. "Okay, so they're military dogs. That's cool and all, but what's that got to do with us?" Riley's smile was cold and professional. "Well, Luna seems to think 3 of your friends are carrying something they shouldn't be. And in my experience, Luna's never wrong." The 3 bikers whose motorcycles had been marked by Luna's detection work were looking increasingly panicked. The thin, nervous man who owned the first bike marked was sweating profusely despite the air conditioning from the rest stop building. The second man, a heavy-set biker with multiple tattoos, kept glancing toward the highway as if calculating his chances of making a run for it. The third, a middle-aged man with a salt and pepper beard, was staring at Luna with a mixture of fear and amazement. "She's bluffing," the vice president said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Dogs make mistakes all the time." "Do they?" Riley asked. She turned to Rex and gave him a subtle hand signal. The big German shepherd immediately stood up and moved to a position directly in front of the club president, sitting down just outside of arm's reach, but close enough to be clearly intimidating. The president took an involuntary step backward. Up close, Rex was even more impressive than he had appeared from a distance. His dark brown eyes were intelligent and focused, studying the man in front of him with the intensity of someone evaluating a potential threat. There was no aggression in his posture, but there was an unmistakable sense of controlled power. "Rex," is trained in apprehension and control, Riley explained conversationally. He can take down a full-grown man in under 3 seconds, hold him on the ground indefinitely, and he's been trained to respond to 27 different verbal commands and 43 hand signals. To demonstrate her point, Riley gave Rex another hand signal. The dog immediately shifted his position, moving to the president's left side and sitting down again, effectively cutting off one of his escape routes. "Stop showing off," the president said, but his voice was shaky now. "We get it. Your dogs are well trained." "Oh, I don't think you do get it," Riley replied. "Let me show you something else." She turned to Thor and spoke a single word. "Watch." The effect was immediate and startling. Thor rose from his sitting position and began moving around the group of bikers in a slow, methodical circle. His movement wasn't threatening in an obvious way, but it was clear that he was positioning himself to monitor and control the entire group. Several of the bikers tried to move away from him, but Thor's path kept bringing him back to positions where he could observe everyone. "Thor is trained in crowd control," Riley explained. "He's been taught to monitor groups of potentially hostile individuals and prevent them from organizing or coordinating aggressive actions. Right now he's making sure none of you do anything stupid." The gray-bearded biker who had been making jokes earlier was no longer laughing. "This is crazy," he muttered. "They're just dogs." The words were barely out of his mouth when he made a critical mistake. Frustrated and embarrassed by the situation, he took an aggressive step toward Riley, raising his hand as if to grab her shoulder. Rex moved faster than anyone thought possible. One moment he was sitting calmly 6 feet away, and the next he was in the air, covering the distance between himself and the gray-bearded biker in a single fluid leap. But Rex didn't attack. Instead, he demonstrated the precision and control that came from years of military training. He planted his front paws on the man's chest with just enough force to knock him off balance, sending him stumbling backward until he tripped and fell to the ground. Before the biker could react, Rex was standing over him, one paw on his chest, his face inches from the man's throat. The dog's lips were pulled back slightly, showing his teeth, but he wasn't snarling or showing any signs of uncontrolled aggression. Instead, he was perfectly calm and completely in control of the situation. "Rex doesn't bite unless I tell him to," Riley said calmly. "But he's been trained to maintain this position for as long as necessary. He once held a Taliban insurgent for 6 hours while waiting for backup to arrive." The fallen biker was breathing heavily, staring up at the massive dog positioned over him. Rex's dark eyes were fixed on his face, and the man could feel the controlled power in the animal's body. One wrong move, one sign of continued aggression, and those powerful jaws could end the confrontation permanently. "Get him off me," the biker pleaded, his earlier confidence completely gone. "Tell him you're sorry," Riley suggested. "Rex understands more English than you might think." "I'm sorry," the man gasped. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean anything by it." Riley gave Rex a small hand signal, and the dog immediately stepped back, releasing the man but remaining close enough to respond if needed. The biker scrambled to his feet, brushing dirt from his leather vest and looking around at his club members with embarrassment. The demonstration had lasted less than 30 seconds, but it had completely changed the dynamic of the encounter. The bikers were no longer dealing with a woman and her pets. They were facing a highly trained military unit that operated with precision, discipline, and overwhelming effectiveness. "Now," Riley said, her voice still calm and professional, "I think we should talk about those motorcycles that Luna found so interesting, because I'm starting to think this conversation is about more than just your hurt feelings." The club president looked at his 3 members whose bikes had been identified, then back at Riley and her dogs. Thor was still circling the group, maintaining his watch pattern. Rex had returned to his position but was clearly ready to respond to any further aggression. Luna sat perfectly still, but her eyes were tracking every movement in the parking lot. For the first time since the encounter had begun, the president seemed to understand that he was no longer in control of the situation. These weren't just dogs, and Riley wasn't just some random traveler they could intimidate and embarrass. They were dealing with professionals, and the afternoon was about to get much more serious. The silence that followed Rex's demonstration stretched across the parking lot like a heavy blanket. The only sounds were the distant hum of traffic on the interstate and the soft panting of the 3 military dogs as they maintained their positions around Riley. The 15 bikers who had been so loud and confident earlier were now standing in stunned silence, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Riley looked around the group, her eyes stopping on each face before moving to the next. She could see the exact moment when each man realized that this situation had moved far beyond their control. The club president was staring at Rex with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. The vice president was nervously wiping sweat from his forehead. The gray-bearded biker who had been taken down was still brushing dirt from his clothes and avoiding eye contact with everyone. "Here's what's going to happen," Riley said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded troops in combat situations. "We're all going to take a step back, literally and figuratively, and we're going to have a civilized conversation about how this afternoon ends." She gave Thor a subtle hand signal, and the big dog stopped his circling pattern and returned to his position at her right side. The movement was so smooth and immediate that several of the bikers couldn't help but be impressed despite their discomfort. "First," Riley continued, "I want to make something clear. My dogs and I didn't come here looking for trouble. We stopped for water and a bathroom break, just like thousands of other travelers do every day. What happened here was entirely your choice." The club president cleared his throat, trying to regain some dignity. "Look, we may have gotten a little carried away with the jokes, but we didn't mean any real harm. Didn't you?" Riley asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because from where I was standing, it felt like you were trying to intimidate a woman traveling alone. It felt like you thought you could use your numbers and your size to make me feel scared and powerless." Several of the bikers shifted uncomfortably. When she put it that way, their behavior sounded much worse than getting carried away with jokes. "We were just having fun," the vice president said weakly. "At my expense," Riley pointed out. "And when I tried to leave, you blocked my path. When I tried to de-escalate, you got more aggressive. That's not fun, gentlemen. That's harassment." Luna, who had been sitting quietly in formation, suddenly stood up and walked over to the club president. She sat down directly in front of him and looked up at his face with her intelligent yellow eyes. The man froze, unsure of what to do. "Luna likes you," Riley said with a slight smile. "She's a good judge of character, and she thinks you're not a bad person, just someone who made some poor choices this afternoon." The president looked down at the beautiful German shepherd sitting in front of him. Up close, he could see the intelligence in her eyes, the calm confidence in her posture. This wasn't a vicious attack dog or an out-of-control animal. This was a professional doing her job. Can I pet her?" he asked hesitantly. Riley considered the question for a moment. "Luna, social mode," she said quietly. The change in the dog's demeanor was immediate but subtle. While she remained alert and professional, there was a slight relaxation in her posture that indicated she was now open to friendly interaction. The club president slowly reached out his hand, letting Luna sniff his fingers before gently scratching behind her ears. The dog's tail gave a small wag and some of the tension in the parking lot began to dissipate. "She's incredible," the president said softly. "I've never seen a dog move like that, respond to commands like that." "None of us have," added the younger biker with the face piercings. "How long does it take to train them to do what they do?" Riley's expression softened slightly. These were the kinds of questions she loved to answer. The kinds that showed genuine interest in her work rather than mockery or disrespect. "Years," she replied. "Rex has been with me for 4 years, and his training started when he was just a puppy. Military working dogs go through months of basic training, then specialized training for their particular skills, then ongoing training throughout their entire careers." She looked at each of her dogs with obvious pride and affection. "These 3 have saved more lives than I can count. Rex has found explosives that would have killed entire convoys. Thor has helped maintain order in situations where human soldiers might have been overwhelmed. Luna has detected everything from hidden weapons to missing persons." "Missing persons?" asked the gray-bearded biker, his earlier aggression completely gone. "Luna found a lost child in the mountains of Afghanistan," Riley explained. a local girl who had wandered away from her village and gotten lost in a snowstorm. The search had been going on for 2 days when Luna picked up her scent. We found the girl, hypothermic but alive, huddled in a cave about 3 miles from where anyone thought to look. The story had a visible impact on the group. These were men who, despite their rough appearance and aggressive behavior, understood the value of protecting the innocent. The idea that these dogs had saved a child's life put their military service in a completely different context. We had no idea, the club president said quietly. When we saw you pull up with the dog crates, we just thought, "You thought I was some rich lady with expensive pets," Riley finished for him. "And instead of asking questions or showing basic respect, you decided to have fun at my expense." The silence that followed was heavy with shame and regret. Several of the bikers were staring at the ground, while others were looking at the 3 dogs with new understanding. "Ma'am," the vice president said suddenly, his voice formal and respectful, "I want to apologize for myself and for all of us. We were way out of line." "We were acting like jerks," added the younger biker. "You and your dogs deserve better than that." Riley nodded, accepting their apologies. "Thank you, that means something." She turned to the 3 bikers whose motorcycles Luna had identified during her detection work. "Now about those bikes. Luna doesn't make mistakes, and I think you gentlemen know exactly what she found." The 3 men exchanged nervous glances. The thin, sweaty biker who owned the first marked motorcycle finally spoke up. "Look, it's just personal use stuff," he said quietly. "Nothing major, nothing we're selling or anything like that." "That's between you and your consciences," Riley replied. "I'm not a police officer and I'm not here to arrest anyone, but I am going to suggest that you think carefully about the choices you're making and the risks you're taking." She gestured toward Luna, who was still accepting gentle pats from the club president. "Luna could find whatever you're carrying from 50 yards away. If she can do it, so can other detection dogs. Police dogs, customs dogs, airport security dogs. Is whatever you're carrying worth the risk of spending years in prison?" The 3 men nodded soberly, clearly taking her warning to heart. Riley gave her dogs a series of hand signals, and all 3 immediately returned to their travel formation. "Rex, Thor, Luna, ready to move," she commanded. The dogs walked calmly to the SUV and jumped into their respective crates without hesitation. Their transition from military working mode back to travel mode was as smooth and professional as everything else they had done. As Riley prepared to close the crate doors, the club president approached her one more time. His entire demeanor had changed from the aggressive, mocking man who had first confronted her. "Ma'am," he said formally, "I want you to know that this conversation changed something for us. We're going to do better." Riley studied his face and saw genuine sincerity there. "I hope so, and I hope you remember that you never know who you're dealing with when you meet someone new. The woman in the grocery store might be a nurse who lives every day. The quiet guy at the gas station might be a veteran who served 3 tours overseas. The person you decide to mock or intimidate might be someone who deserves your respect, not your harassment." She closed the crate doors and walked around to the driver's side of her SUV. Before getting in, she turned back to the group one more time. "For what it's worth," she said, "I think you're probably good people who just made some bad choices today. Learn from this. Do better next time." As Riley drove away from the rest stop, she could see the bikers in her rearview mirror. They were standing in a group, talking quietly among themselves. The body language was completely different from when she had arrived. Instead of aggressive posturing and loud laughter, there was thoughtful discussion and what looked like some serious soul-searching. 6 months later, Riley would receive an unexpected email from the Road Devils Motorcycle Club. They had started volunteering with a local veterans organization, helping to raise money for military working dog retirement programs. The club president's message was simple: "Thank you for teaching us what real strength looks like. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected teachers, and sometimes it takes a woman and 3 remarkable dogs to show a group of tough guys what true courage, discipline, and honor really mean."